Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, welcome to this week's Climate and Coordination RCAST. I'm here with my very good friend, Richelle Ellis, and also known as Richelle Gribble. And she's an amazing artist. She's also training to become an astronaut. And she is an expert on networks and has traveled through jungles and forests and the Arctic and all sorts of places. And I just wanted her to maybe talk to us a bit about the overview effect, which I understand is one of your inspirations. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what you're up to.
Sure thing. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. And thanks for the intro, Nora. So yes, I think the overview effect is a really important concept to share relative to the environmental movement. And I'm not so familiar, too many people know about this idea. It was coined by a space philosopher and author, Frank White, after he had interviewed with about 43 astronauts about their experience in spaceflight. And many of these astronauts accounted this sensation of being weightless, seeing Earth from above, and realizing it's one interconnected organism. It's from space, borders and boundaries disappear, and it's that aha moment that we are all interdependent, and thus we need to act together to accomplish these greater feats. And especially when it comes to the climate crisis and the changes taking place in our environment. So many astronauts return from their space flight and start their own organizations or, become advocates for the ocean or work with youth. And it's really to celebrate and promote that shift in perspective from the overview effect.
Okay, so I'm just going to put Richelle's website in the chat right now for people who want to take a look at some of her amazing works, because she has done so much different stuff. So maybe you could say, I know that your work has already been to space more than once.
Yes, about 5 times.
Okay, right. So severely undercounted that. Sorry. So I guess maybe you could say there are some future projects that you have going on that are also going to be sent to space, right?
Yes.
And probably some of those are not public information yet.
Not quite, but I can share a little bit of the parameters of the
project. And also I would love if you could explain a little more about like your journey as an artist, as a visual artist, and like how that connects with this overview thing. Because I know that you see it all kind of connecting and really informing yourself as an artist. I thought maybe you could say a little about that.
Absolutely. So a big part of my artistic process is through expeditionary research. So as Nora mentioned, traveling around the world and exploring the depths of the ocean to the Arctic terrain really informs my art practice. And I think it's because when you're fully immersed in a new environment or a new landscape, you start to notice things that would otherwise be overlooked. And oftentimes those things that are overlooked are actually the things that need our attention most. And so that really pushes me to travel and explore and be able to share things about the environment with the public. That way we can all be more attentive to these changes that are happening around us. Anything from discovering plastics wedged into glaciers, or, traveling in the jungle and noticing that the tree ants are carrying these leaves off the canopy, and that their population's actually dwindling, but they have such an impact on that local environment and that terrain. So noticing those details and being able to express that in art has always been my way of sharing these discoveries. And I think that they help us explore this overview effect and just showing how interconnected everything is. So that's really what inspires me to travel as an expeditionary artist, and really pushes me to explore space, because from space you see our relationship to the world. As many people say, the earthrise image, the first image we saw of Earth, that's a portrait, the first self-portrait of humanity. And that actually kickstarted the environmental movement in the 60s.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that symbol was the first time that people really woke up to the fact that we're on this blue marble, and it's swirling, it's beautiful, it's alive. And so how do you carry that story back to people? So this really inspired me to want to send artwork to space to amplify that story of biodiversity and our oneness, and space as this platform to both inspire us, but also show us what is impossible. You think of, that notion of the sky is not the limit.
Yeah, seeing what is the farthest you can go.
Exactly. And oftentimes, I mean, that's going to become so imperative for environmental changes, is doing what seems so out of reach, or doing something that seems impossible. It's these drastic gestures that can inspire us to think more ambitiously about how we come up with climate solutions and environmental problem solving.
Okay, so I guess I'll pause there. I would love to know if anybody has any questions for Richelle so far, but if not, I have a couple more questions to ask her. But yeah, I would love to hear from anybody.
Yeah, when you did the intro, Nora, you said networking.
Yes, not networking.
Meant by networking in that regard?
Yeah, so she is very good at networking, but I was really talking more about networks. And so maybe, Richelle, you could talk a little bit about the art pieces that you've done, like Network Life and other art pieces. Again, her website is richellegribble.com, and I put it in the chat for anybody who wants to look at her art. But yeah, maybe you could say a little bit about that.
I'm on it.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah. So this fascination with networks is really coming from this moment, actually, where I stepped back and I looked at all of my artworks, and I realized that they all had a similar pattern emerge, and they were showcasing some kind of connected structure, whether it was a freeway system, or perhaps cells in the body, or vascular systems. And I realized that from both the micro to macro scale, they all have very similar forms. And this project that Nora mentioned, called Networked Life, was a 365-day art project where every day I recalled some kind of network that was either witnessed or experienced or shared with me, and made an artwork about that. And it was through this process, I didn't really realize this, that I was exploring graph theory and beginning to recognize various network structures that exist around the world, whether it's a radial structure like a dandelion or a firework, or a tree-like structure, which is branching and coming from one node and like then extending outwards.
The lungs would be an example of that too, going downward rather than up, which is interesting. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, the tree system or a root system.
Yeah.
And that's just really how information spreads and things start to impact and grow and have these ripple effects. And to me, that really is just how we're evolving as a world. And realizing these invisible threads that connect all of us is really imperative if we're trying to find how we can impact each other and have an impact in the rest of the world. It's by activating these networks and these systems that we can start to make real changes.
Yeah, and I think one fascinating thing about technology these days is that we're seeing kind of a continuation of what already happens within nature. Like nature has developed these incredibly complex networks, and now we're seeing technology kind of copy that, sort of following the lead of nature, which I find to be really fascinating. And I love the story you told me just a few minutes ago about diving at night, scuba diving, and seeing the bioluminescence, which is algae, plankton, something. Okay.
Yeah.
And they are glowing in the dark because of some evolutionary imperative. And maybe you can explain that more, but I just love the story of you saying when you came back to the surface, seeing the stars in the night sky, and they're not really being aligned between the bioluminescent creatures in the ocean versus the galaxies, and sort of seeing it all as one interconnected cosmic picture.
Exactly.
Which is so cool. And I just can't believe I know you. Okay.
So
does anybody else have a question?
Part of the reason that I'm kind of interested, first of all, of course, networks have multiple connotations, particularly in technology.
Sure.
But now I understand what you mean by a network. There are two things. So one of which is the late, great Alan Turing and what he did, which you may or may not be familiar with. So we all know him for the Turing machine and for the Enigma machine. But one of the things that Alan Turing did was apply mathematics to morphogenesis, which is the process by which zebras have stripes and cows have, patches, and daisies have petals, and all of this. And he came up with the mathematics that describe it, beautifully simple equation that truly describes it. And it's amazing that from something so tiny, these amazing networks of structures can be created in nature. So that's kind of one observation. But the other one, because we're on an RChain call, I thought I'd just put in this little link in the chat. But I'd be interested to show you like 30 seconds of a network, and I'll explain what it is, because you might find this interesting. Because I looked at some of the artwork that you've done, the sort of spiderwebby things, the networks kind of things, and this is a depiction of how Bitcoin's blockchain was created over time, represented as the relationship between the people that commit code over time in an open source collaborative way, right? And it's I pasted it in. It's worth watching. I won't share my screen to show you, but worth watching it, because I think there's a kind of backstory to it, because it's a way of, in the same way the astronauts went up and looked down on the planet, what you're doing with this graphic is looking from a high level view of how people collaborate, which is a fascinating topic in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think it's also amazing that we wouldn't have been able to do any of this, like, for example, have this phone call the way that we're doing it just very short time ago. Like, our networks seem to be really expanding at a very accelerating rate. And I think that, people often say, why do we need to go to space? Like, we have problems on Earth, but I think it's not really one or the other. It seems like we need to save Earth and we need to go to space. And I feel like similar in the way that there's like a huge acceleration in technology networks and the capabilities of those. There also seems to be like an urge to kind of have an interplanetary network, or like for humans to expand beyond Earth. And that also feels kind of like a network type urge. Like, do you agree with that? Or here's another question I wanted to ask you. Where do you think the urge comes from for human beings to go to space? Like, do you think it's that we're adventurous? Do you think it's that we're curious? Do you think it's that we're bored? Like, what do you think is the urge, and what is the urge for you? Because I don't know anyone else who's training to be an astronaut. I don't think. Yeah. Pretty rare and interesting thing to do, but I would love to know like where you think it comes from. Right. And for you.
I mean, that is interesting in thinking of the context to networks. I mean, maybe the urge comes from this desire to better understand how connected we really are to everything else. And, you know, if you look back at early settlers, there's always been this instinct and impulse for humanity to go beyond, to go a little bit further, to go to the what's just out of reach.
Right.
And I think it's because when you're in that sort of pursuit, you are forced to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. You're encouraged to develop technologies that go a little bit beyond what is comfortable. And I think that, for me as an artist, is really fascinating, because it allows me to make art in new materials and new ways, and really push the culture and the thinking of what art means off planet. And so I think it's a really rich environment to explore, whether you're looking at culinary arts in space, to
culinary arts.
Yes.
Cooking.
Okay. And what are you eating in space?
Okay. Skittles all day. Just kidding.
and you know, and then the technologies that you're using. And I think it really helps accelerate things to move faster. And so people say, why do you want to go to space? And why do we need these things to exist in space?
Yeah.
But actually, if you're designing for spaceflight, you're innovating at such a rapid pace. And I think those technologies are going to be needed to tackle some of the issues on Earth. So they go further, they go beyond.
I'm so glad you said that.
It's exponential changes in the ways that things are being made versus this linear progression.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting, because I feel like we've done that throughout history so many times. And like now it's time to like take a bigger leap than we did before. But like, for example, so many things got developed because of World War II, which was a horrible event, but there was a lot of innovation that took place because of that. So yeah, that's really fascinating.
Well, you know, innovation happens in a network. It doesn't happen isolated. There's no innovation that happens isolated. It's always a network.
Right. And that's the system of emergence. When you get all of these entities connected at the same time, you see what is something greater that emerges that is greater than its parts. And I think blockchain is a perfect example of that. And that, I think, is just going to accelerate our progress so much, that we are so interconnected that we can have these moments of emergence take place, whether it's emergence in space of discovering a new way of cooking and preparing foods in space, or emergence at home of how are we linking our solar panels and working with those different technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot more to ask you. I know that you can't stay on, probably for too much longer. Does anybody else have a question for Richelle? If not, I'll probably ask her one more question.
Well, I just like to kind of thank you for what you do and your contribution. In so many ways, art can precede science. Art is like another way of kind of observing the universe. Science is another way, and sometimes art observes the universe, and science has to catch up. You see examples of it in art history, and it feels like that's kind of where you're at. Like you are recognizing that we need to develop global self-awareness as a species, and you're kind of exploring how that could work as an artist. And so I just applaud what you do. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think that's definitely the essence of what it's all about. And to just kind of echo your statement of how does art precede science? I mean, a perfect example that's very tangible is all sci-fi. If you look at Star Trek, you look at these things that seem so out of reach.
Totally.
And now, we're all talking on tablets right now.
Right.
And
I remember growing up, 'cause I'm way old, right? So I'm very jealous of the space aspect of your life, because that's very much what I wanted to do as a little boy. And I remember having a telescope on top of the flat roof garage and using it in an experiment to measure the diameter of the Earth and doing all crazy things like that. And I watched the moon landing live with my dad. And it's just, I think it's amazing bringing that level of thinking about art into space and space into art. I think that's an amazing transformational journey that you're on, and I will be looking at your website forevermore.
That's so nice. Yeah. So maybe the last thing I could ask you is, well, you have a lot going on. You're always making new work. Hopefully getting out of this pandemic soon, as we started to sort of inch out of it here in Los Angeles. Maybe you could say something about what you're looking forward to in the future, or something that maybe there's a problem you hope to solve, or what is one of your next horizons?
Yes. So I guess we haven't really tackled too much about how am I training to be an astronaut? And
yeah, we could talk for 5 hours literally about any one of these topics, but yes.
Well, I think an important part of my investigations is through this process of doing analog space missions. So I recently returned from a space analog at High Seas, which is a simulation site partnering with NASA Goddard, where they basically host a space mission within a small habitat. You have a small crew of about 6 crewmates, and you live and work inside this enclosure, which is actually a lot like quarantine.
And you were in Hawaii.
In Hawaii,
yes.
On one of the largest volcanoes in the world, which is actually one of the tallest mountains in the world, but a lot of it is submerged in water.
That's fascinating.
But the volcanic terrain is this bright, red kind of regolith lava rock structure, and it looks like an alien planet when you're there. And so this was my first analog mission, and now I'm starting to realize there are many other analogs that you can do to train and prepare and get in that mindset of living off planet. So I'm excited to be joining the Sensoria Network, which is a space community, and we're going to Poland for a lunar mission with a
oh my god, you didn't even tell me this,
called Lunaris in July.
Okay, great.
So
Poland. So exciting.
It's going to be an adventure, definitely. But I'm really fascinated by thinking about art on the moon, and I've got several projects that will be flying to the moon this year. So I'll be both a participant in this analog, experimenting and prototyping in this kind of lunar dust during our EVAs, where we put on a spacesuit and walk around and make
what
projects.
Does EVA stand for?
I believe it's vehicular activities. Yes.
Oh, I see. So like when you're just walking around.
Yes. And in space, that would be like the equivalent of a spacewalk. You put on your suit and then head outside.
So is that the picture of you? Is that the picture of you on the website? The helmet on?
Yes. I love that picture. I know exactly what picture you're talking about, because when she showed me
I want the helmet. How much?
Well, yeah, when you showed me it, I freaked out. I was like, this is iconic. You have to frame this. I was like, post it everywhere on social media. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. It means that I know what I'm talking about. So yeah, Richelle has some other things to do. So unfortunately, she can't stay with us the full time, but we have other things to talk about. Do you want to say anything before you go?
Just, I guess my last statement here would just to be aware that, you know, for all of us to kind of take a strand and realize that we're all part of this giant web, this giant network, and think about what are the things that we want to feed through this system, whether it's positive or negative. It's going to start to have ripples of effects to all of us. And I think we need a lot more positive developments, whether that's in our technologies or just in our the ways that we connect with each other to really start to elevate who we are and what we can do. And so I hope that all of us continue to work together to tackle some of these enormous issues that we're faced with and see what emerges.
Awesome. Take a strand. I've never heard that before, but it's really inspiring. So thank you for joining us, Richelle. I think you are a legend already. And it's just amazing what you are going to do. So thank you so much. And the rest of us are going to continue talking about some climate news. And yes, great to talk with you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Nice to connect.
Thanks, Richelle.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I have a couple of articles that I can share, but I've been talking this whole time. So I wanted to see if maybe Darryl or others had anything that they wanted to share this week first before I continue on.
I have no specific article, but I do think it might be worth pausing and talking about Elon Musk's latest announcements, because they are entirely related to blockchain and climate change.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about that. In fact, I have an article for this week that I wanted to share that was along those lines. So this is actually perfect, and I'll put it in the chat. I guess the first thing I'll say is that obviously over the weekend we saw, over the past 2 days, not the weekend, we saw some very strong engagement within the RChain community about sort of responding on Twitter to Elon's threads. I'm not sure if anybody has seen those, but I went ahead and I tagged a bunch of the journalists that Darryl helped me find that talked about NFTs and the environment. So a bunch of them have now been made aware, hopefully, of the discussion going on. And now also the article that I just put in the chat seems like a lot of journalists are really starting kind of a mainstream debate about environment and blockchain. So there's definitely a lot of development happening.
Yeah, I've spent several hours over the last day and a bit putting stuff out there about why people should get off proof of work based networks and buy into proof of stake based networks.
Yeah, I'm really excited that people are starting to really discuss this kind of out in the open, because I feel like until Elon did that tweet and crashed the Bitcoin market, I feel like it wasn't really something people were talking about as much. It was starting to get a lot of attention, I feel, because of the artists that were sort of protesting NFTs. And then again, Darryl, that ties into what you just said about how art sometimes can lead us in new directions, or the artists themselves lead us in new directions. But now that Elon has specifically touched on it and, you know, made a big decision about it, I feel like there's really a space for more intelligent discourse, and like maybe finally people will start getting out of the mode of speculation and try to invite, you know, more a wider perspective than just speculation.
There has been quite a lot of negative sentiment expressed, that actually what Elon Musk said is not true, and that Bitcoin, for instance, is nowhere near the unsustainable behemoth that people make it out to be, because, and this is the narrative that I've been debunking as well, because many people that run mining syndicates are doing so and using sustainably produced energy. Right? That's the narrative. No, it's not bad for the planet at all. We're using sustainable energy. As long as everyone does that, that's fine. Everything will be wonderful. Well, of course it won't. And the reason it won't is there's an opportunity cost to the generation and consumption of that electricity for the entire purpose of solving a cryptographic puzzle to earn your Bitcoin. And so it doesn't really change things in a largely positive way. At best, it remains neutral, and neutral isn't what we need. We need a reversal. So you might find that on your travels. When you look at things.
Yeah, it's a good point. I've read a couple articles like that, the kind of Bitcoin defenders who are saying, there's also a couple articles out there. In fact, Elon took this angle not long ago. He's reversed it obviously this week, but prior to that, he was saying Bitcoin's sucking up of electricity is like helping spur on sustainable solutions, which is kind of an absurd argument. But I think that we're gonna mark May 12th on our calendars, May 12th, 2021, as the first time something happened to the price of Bitcoin because of awareness about its effect on the climate. I think that it's going to continue to happen. Of course, Bitcoin will continue going up and down and up and down. But this will be the first example where, because of somebody's statement, the price of Bitcoin plunged almost $10,000, is to my knowledge, because of concerns around climate. And so I think that this is a momentous time in history. Of course, we here at RChain have been talking about this for a long time. We knew that this was going to happen at some point in time. People were going to face the music and be aware. And we're here to provide an alternative solution. So to me, it's a momentous week in the future history of all things blockchain and climate.
Amen. My hope, though, is that somehow this won't turn into another sort of reason to say, see, anytime you get the environment involved, the economy crashes, that whole argument. And I'm hoping that it'll turn more into an inflection point about how this crisis cannot be ignored anymore. And also hopefully will inspire people to understand and appreciate the need for good science, good data, solid information, and, people making informed decisions, because these problems with climate are incredibly complex, especially when you talk about something like cryptocurrency, which is constantly evolving and changing. So I'm hoping that it's this discussion, not our discussion, but including our discussion, the global discussion, is seen as an opportunity and not, people running away and saying, see, climate is, a non-starter. I'm hoping people don't see it that way.
I'm wondering how many Bitcoin miners are even necessary to secure the Bitcoin network. I mean, couldn't you get by with just a fraction of the number of miners you have now? Of course, I know that's not how it works. It's a competition, and anybody can jump in and be a miner and try to win the reward. But a lot of the waste is just there are too many miners. I think many more than what's necessary. And Bitcoin's a protocol. It can evolve. Maybe there are solutions of just trying to limit somehow the pool of miners that can play the game at any time.
I'd just say that's that's a band-aid over a gaping wound.
Right. Yeah.
Because the issue is proof of work, right? So what you have to do is change, instead of betting thermodynamics, bet a stake, be transparent. So it's getting away from having a cryptographic puzzle to solve, a compute-intensive puzzle. Change that, and everything changes. It's not just it uses less electricity. Actually, if you remove proof of work, you speed up the network, because people aren't cycling the CPUs in the way that they are now. So the reasoning why proof of work was there in the first place in Satoshi's paper was all well and good, but nobody had thought this through systemically. And I don't think anyone at that point, when that paper was published, had any vision that this would be as big as it has become, and therefore as problematic as it is. So it's not really, it's an evolution. I think everyone and their dog's looking at other consensus protocols, of which proof of stake is definitely the most promising of all of them. So the way I look at it is, and I kind of agree with what you said very much, Darryl, which is that could be the day that marks the change.
Well, he literally called out, like he literally said, we are actively looking for an alternative solution that will utilize less than 1% of Bitcoin's electricity. So he wrote that directly in his tweet.
I think he needs to pick up the phone and talk to Greg.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out a way to connect.
This is another thing that I think RChain really needs to focus on expressing to people. I mean, I understand that there's a lot of, importance of security, scaling, and all that stuff. Like, that's totally important, but also the environmental impact of RChain, or the environmental improvements. So I'm hoping somebody can write a more technical minded blog about that soon, because I feel that would be really advantageous to be able to send to people. And if it's written well enough, is something that could possibly be reposted in other publications, bigger publications, because sometimes that's what they do, is they'll take a piece that's already written and say, this is great, can we share it on our platform? There's no work for them because it's already written. So it's like, they want to talk about it. So, but yeah, I think this is going to be a big advantage for RChain, because as we see in a lot of other sectors, people are becoming more discerning about what products and services they get involved with based on their environmental impact. And blockchain is not going to be an exception to that, I don't think. And luckily, Elon, for all of his eccentricities, cares about this. Thank God. So that's one good thing we have on our side.
I'd be tempted to put a little box with and repeat the little bit of the tweet that he had that was the less than 1% bit, and put that on the RChain homepage. Because it already says secure, sustainable, scalable in big letters. Be quite nice to have the tweet at the bottom of that, with an attribution to Elon Musk.
Yeah, maybe that's the new RChain slogan. RChain, less than 1% of Bitcoin's footprint.
Yeah. It's not a bad one, given that he's already got it out there and everyone's talking about it.
Right.
You kind of, make it easy for people to make the link.
Make it a
I'm not clear on is RChain actually less than 1%? Is it actually there?
I think over time, as you scale the network out with more validator nodes, and with the prospect of hardware speedups, which consume less power, it probably is. It wouldn't surprise me if it was less than 1%. It wouldn't surprise me if it was less than 1% now.
Right, but that's also because of just RChain is a smaller network, or you're saying even
because it's proof of stake. So when the validator nodes validate the transactions versus miners doing their mining, they check the blocks that they've got. Miners check blocks, validators check blocks, but then the miners have to solve this cryptographic problem. and the validators don't. So the amount of time it takes to validate a block is pretty small. It's tiny compared to solving the cryptographic problem. I've got a little script running on my computer that I can always run, which does effectively what they do to do proof of work, right? To solve the cryptographic problem. And I can tell you now that my little MacBook Pro, if I set it going now to solve that cryptographic problem as it currently is on Bitcoin's blockchain today, so the dimensions of the problem, it's unlikely that I will get an answer from my MacBook Pro until maybe the end of the weekend. So now imagine all that time and energy spent doing that versus if I ran a validator node on the same computer, it would be done in a second.
So it's not just an energy saving solution, it's a time saving solution.
Yeah, because time is money, even in hardware,
Well, sure.
And all that's happening is the hardware is running like the clappers, consuming electricity to solve this cryptographic problem, using up more and more energy to do so, not just one miner, but all the miners. And then one of the miners puts their hands up and say, I've solved it. And then all the other miners pause and say, have they really? Oh, yes, they have. And then they stop. But by that time, the amount of electricity that's been used is at least the amount of electricity used by the one that won times the number of miners. It's huge. You don't expect to put $10 into your laptop in order for it to do something that normally you expect to take 1 or 2 seconds, right? You just don't expect to have to pay that amount of money in your electricity, but really that's what's happening. So I suspect that we are less than 1% because proof of stake is so much more efficient.
And aren't there some things about RChain, specifically the platform, that also makes it more efficient? So it's not just that we're in the company of other proof of stake, and so we're more efficient, but in actuality, the way our concurrency works, and especially with our hardware play that optimizes these transactions, doesn't that make us even
kind of? I think.
efficient?
I mean, if I was going to explain it, I would probably say that there's lots out there. There are others doing proof of stake, and there are others trying to address concurrency, but there's very few other than RChain, maybe 1 or 2 others that have looked at the theoretical underpinnings in order to fully understand when you can use concurrency and when you cannot. And the danger is if you have a really scalable network, say using proof of stake, and you don't address that, your smart contracts will tread on each other. And so you get unintended consequences, and you get DAO bugs happening all over the place. I mean, way more than they happen now, because everything's running much quicker. So it's the combination of the proof of stake with Casper and Rolang as a language that enables us to understand the concurrency and ensure that we can get maximum concurrency with no side effects. That's how you do it.
Right.
And to my knowledge, I don't know of another one that really has nailed it. There might be one other that I've heard of, because I know that Phil Wadler at Edinburgh University was working with another blockchain company, but I'm not sure that they have the elegance of Rolang, which it does a little more than I've said. It's much smarter than that.
Like with the behavioral types and OSLF.
With the behavioral, exactly.
Right. Very cool.
So I think, let's do that on the website. Let's put something in. But I'll mention that at the staff meeting.
Cool. I noticed that Ian put some stuff in the chat. One was about Epic versus Apple. And the other one was about Lina Khan gets bipartisan support to be the next FTC commissioner. Did you want to expand on those thoughts, Ian?
Yeah, Darryl, I thought maybe these two you'd be particularly interested in. One with Epic versus Apple. Epic Games makes Fortnite, and they're suing Apple in an antitrust action because Apple, in its walled garden of its game store or of their iOS marketplace, they glean 30% off of any sales that happen on any app that goes through their marketplace. So for instance, if you install a Netflix app through the App Store, every time Apple rents a movie, 30% of that rental goes to Apple. And the same for the Fortnite store. So if you want to buy yourself an avatar like Mr. Peely or some sword or something, 30% goes to Apple. And that really adds up.
Well, that would affect any utility token model then.
That's correct, right. And there are other, you can compare this also to say PlayStation. They also have kind of a captive marketplace. But comparing this to something like blockchain, which is wide open and anyone can create their own marketplace and marketplaces can compete. It shows some of the dangers around centralization that really Apple has taken it pretty far, and it's quite rare for a company to file an antitrust action, and I think Epic is really just trying to call Apple out and expose the greed and the how uneven things are in its marketplace.
Yeah, that's a huge impediment to some of the stuff that I want to build.
The other, just I heard that Lina Khan, who is I think she's a Cornell law professor, and she's been quite outspoken about Facebook and the controls, how social media has to be reined in. And it's interesting that she is getting bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans in the US are all supporting her to take on the role of FTC commissioner. So that's a pretty strong signal that that FTC might try to rein in social media. That's the Federal Trade Commission. But on the Epic versus Apple, I know Darryl, you're into VR, and the idea that we might have these dueling metaverses where all of the marketplaces, all of the transactions and economics in a metaverse. Can you imagine if it all had to be taxed at 30% by whoever made your VR rig?
Yeah, that would certainly put a downer on any middle class forming. And I guess, if that becomes like the accepted norm, then, Facebook, when they jump in, they'll just charge the 30% too. And then we're stuck with these two monopolies. Like, it's certainly a call out for an open source phone now. Yeah, I mean, hopefully there'd be enough pressure. It sounds like Fortnite are, holding up a torch that is needed, and hopefully there will be more that join the resistance.
Yeah, it's really exposing a lot of Apple's practices that they were really happy to keep quiet. So a lot's coming out from this case. It's interesting to follow.
Yeah, definitely going to keep following that. Thanks. So what's the thought about what potentially Lina Khan's participation will kind of unveil. I mean, I can see how it's bipartisan in the sense that both sides have strong viewpoints about, the conservatives don't like cancel culture and the idea that Facebook and Twitter can kick off their now definitively chosen leader.
Well, it's the same thing as what's happening with Epic and Apple. The focus would be on antitrust. Looking at Facebook and Google and Apple as monopolies and trying to break them up. I think that's where her focus would be.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see how that unfolds. But it sounds like she would certainly support the position that Fortnite is taking then.
Well, it's, interesting timing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for a great conversation. Thank you to Richelle Gribble for joining us. If you're interested in looking at her art, just go to richellegribble.com, and we'll make sure that her website is also in the description. And we will see you next time on the Climate and Coordination RCAST. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, all.